This is Algebra Skills number 7. It deals with products, factors, and quadratic equations. First thing they ask me to do is multiply a monomial by a binomial. One term multiplies a parenthesis with two terms in it. When I do that, I distribute 2 times 3x and 2 times 5. So there I'm writing 2 times 3x plus 2 times 5. 2 times 3x is 6x, 2 times 5 is 10. There's another one here, x multiplies 4x plus 9, so x multiplies the first term, plus x multiplies the second term of 9. X times 4x is 4x squared, and x times 9 is 9x. This is multiplying a binomial times a binomial. Sometimes teachers talk about this as FOIL. First, outers, inners, and lasts. The first in the parenthesis multiplies the first guy in that parenthesis. That's the F. The outers are the outer of the 4 numbers are these 2 numbers. They multiply. And then the inners, these 2 guys. And then the last in this parenthesis times the last in that parenthesis. You can also think of it as everybody gets a term to multiply. So the first term here multiplies the first and then the second term. And then the second term in this parenthesis multiplies the first and the second term. So when I multiply x times x times negative 2, notice I'm making that minus 2 as a negative 2. 3 multiplies x, and then 3 multiplies the negative 2. X times x is x squared. X times a negative 2 is a minus 2x. 3 times x is a positive 3x or plus 3x. 3 times a negative 2 is a negative 6. These inner terms are alike, so they can combine, and when they combine, they become a positive 1x. So that is multiplying a binomial times a binomial. Now, I'm going to quickly go through, you can look at those on your own. It's just the same kind of problem as I just did. Here's another one like this. I'm going to do this one. So same thing, the first term distributes to both, and then the second term gets a chance to multiply by distributing to both, otherwise known as FOIL. So 3x multiplies 3x, that's what I have here. 3x multiplies a negative 2, 2 multiplies 3x, and 2 multiplies a negative 2. When they multiply, this becomes 9x squared, this becomes a negative 6x, the next stuff becomes a positive 6x, and 2 times a negative 2 is a negative 4. Now, combine these middle terms and look what happens. They drop out. So I have 9x squared minus 4. The reason I wanted to do this one is because later we're going to go backwards. We're going to say, factor this into 2 parentheses that look like that. And I just want to show you something. Both of these numbers are perfect square numbers. This is 3x times 3x. And 4 is a perfect square number. It comes from 2 times 2, and in the middle, I have a minus sign. So this is called the difference of 2 perfect squares. When we have the difference of 2 perfect squares, to get them back into a parenthesis, you build 2 parentheses, and you say the first factors of 3x go to the front, and the back factors of 2 and 2 go to the back. And because this middle term drops out to be 0, you want one to be positive and one to be negative. So that's what you do here. Make one positive and one negative. So this is going to be 9x squared. This is going to be a negative 6x and a positive 6x. They're going to drop out. And then I'm going to have a negative 4 or a minus 4. Okay, factoring out a common monomial. 2 and 4 both have 2 in them. So I'm showing you that. 2x is 2 times x, 4 is 2 times 2. They both have a 2, so that 2 can be factored out to the front, leaving me with x plus 2 to put in parentheses. 3x squared plus 9x, if I write them in factored form, it would be 3 times x, and 9x 3 times x. This has a 3, so does that one. This has an x, so does that one. So you kick out that common 3x to the front, factor it out to the front, and left inside would be just the x, the plus sign, and the 3. Those are the only things that I did not circle. Okay, now we're going to get into something called multiply and add. Okay, I want to factor this trinomial now. It has 3 terms to it, and this is the multiply and add method. I need to come up with 2 magic numbers that multiply to be the multiplication of the first and the last number, 1 and 21. So they have to multiply to be 21, and they have to add up to be the middle number. So 2 numbers that I know that multiply to be 21 and add to 10 are 7 and 3. There's no number in the front here except for an invisible 1 if you had to put a number. And so therefore I can go right into the parentheses. I build 2 parentheses, I put 7 and 3 at the backs of the parentheses, and I split this x squared into x and x. Okay, I need 2 numbers that multiply to be 1 times a negative 12, which is a negative 12, and they have to add to be the middle number of negative 1. Those 2 numbers are a negative 4 and 3, no number in the front, so I can place those right into the parentheses in the backs. Negative 4, minus 4, positive 3, split apart the x squared, they go in the front. Here's another one, 2 numbers that multiply to be 10 that add up to be a negative 7, are negative 2 and a negative 5. No number in the front, so I can go right to the parentheses and put a negative 2 and a negative 5 in the backs, and x squared breaks to x and x in the front. This is a level 1. All of these have no number in the front of the x squared. Now we're at level 2. There's a number in the front of the x squared, but you started out the same way. You need 2 numbers that multiply to be 2 times 3, which are 6, and add to be the middle number of 5. I think those numbers are 3 and 2, because 3 times 2 is 6, and 3 plus 2 is 5. Now, there's a number in the front. When there's a number in the front, you don't go right to the parentheses. I put these on top of each other. So I put plus 3 here and plus 2 here. And then I split apart the x squared into x and x. And then there's a 2 here. I place the 2 so it divides diagonally. So this 2 is going to be placed here because it divides diagonally into that number. And when I divide it in there, it goes in there once. So this is now my final answer. 2x plus 3 goes in one parenthesis, x plus 1 goes into the other. Okay, 2 numbers that multiply to be a negative 10 that add to be a negative 3 would be a negative 5 and 2. There's a number in the front. When there's a number in the front, I have to put this stuff on top of each other. So I put a negative 5 and a positive 2 on top of each other. I split apart the x's, put them on top of each other, and place the 5 so it divides diagonally. So I'm going to place it here because it's going to divide into that number once. So my answer is going to be x minus 1 and 5x plus 2. If you do 4 on these, you'll get back to where you started. If you don't, you've done something wrong. Okay, so that's a level 2. Now, level 3. Level 3, you think, well, it doesn't look any different than level 2. Correct, but watch what happens. Here I have 2 numbers that multiply to be 24, that add up to be a negative 11. They would be negative 8 and a negative 3. I place my negative 8 and my negative 3 on top of each other. X squared, I break apart and put on top of each other. And then I place the 6. 6 does not go into 8 without getting some decimals and fractions. 6 does not go into 3 without getting some decimals and fractions. So what I do is I go back and I split the 6 into its factors of 2 and 3. And I place them here and here so that they divide diagonally. So that means that the 3 has to go on the top, so it'll divide into that 3 once, and the 2 has to go on the bottom, so it divides into 8 4 times. Leaving, you don't do anything with the fronts, you leave those. So those are your answers, your 2 parentheses. 2 numbers that multiply to be a negative 60 that add to be a negative 11 would be negative 15 and 4. I place them on top of each other because I have a 10 in the front. Split apart the x squareds. I first try placing the 10, but when I place 10 on the top or the bottom, when I divide, I'm going to get a decimal. So I split the 10 into 2 and 5 and place them so that 2 divides into 4 twice and 5 goes into 15 3 times. Those are my 2 parentheses. Here's the last level. And in these, you just have to remember to factor out a common monomial first. So they each have a 2 in them. When I factor out the 2, I'm left with this trinomial. And I factor this. 2 numbers that multiply to be a negative 15 that add up to be 2 or 5 and a negative 3. Place them on top of each other. Split apart the x's and place 5. Yes, this time I can. Place it so it divides into there once. Now I had a 2 in the front, so the 2 stays in the front, and then my 2 parentheses are x plus 1 and 5x minus 3. This is a special case. When I factor these, this is that special case that I talked about before. This is a perfect square, x times x. This is a perfect square, 6 times 6, and there's a minus sign in between. So the x's go in the fronts of the parentheses, the 6's go in the backs of the parentheses, one is positive and one is negative. I can also do it the long way, because this is x squared plus 0x, minus 36. So I need two numbers that multiply to be a negative 36 that add up to be 0. They are 6 and a negative 6. With no number in the front, it would become that. You can look at these on your own because I don't want to run out of time to do this problem here. Now it says solve this by factoring. It does not say just the factor, you have to solve. Up to this point, we've just been putting them in parentheses. So yes, we're still going to factor on this side, but then at the end, we're going to solve because it has equals 0. Okay? In the beginning, I said you can't change God's number by like dividing everything by 2. But now I can because I have an equation. So if I have an equation, I can divide all of these terms by 2. And when I do that, it becomes a little bit simpler. Okay, now I factor this. Two numbers that multiply to be negative 12 that add to be negative 4 are negative 6 and 2. I place those on top of each other because there's a 4 in the front. 4 does not go into either of them without a decimal. So I take 4 and split it into 2 and 2, place those in the front. 2 goes into 6 3 times, 2 goes into 2 once. So I have 2x minus 3, 2x plus 1 is now equal to 0. So all of this was just helping me factor. Now I'm back to the equation where I had equals 0. So I still have the equal 0. If two parentheses multiply to be 0, either the first one is equal to 0 or the second one is equal to 0. So either 2x minus 3 is equal to 0, which means 2x is a 3 and x is 3 halves, or 2x plus 1 is 0, which means 2x is a negative 1 and x is a negative 1/2. So I have two answers to this problem. And that is our review of multiplying and factoring. Your homework is listed on your calendar.